Let's talk about the derivative of log base b of x, right? So of any base. I'm going to approach this though from a different perspective. So if you're with me, hopefully you have seen my video or are exposed to the derivative of a general inverse function. So that's the angle we're going to look at, the derivative of log base b of x. So that being said, like I said, we're going to think of log base b of x just being as an inverse function in and of itself. And so you can imagine in my notation, I'm going to write it that way. Right, so again, this formula is the formula I said was our precursor. This is something we've already seen before and I did in a previous video. So go check out my previous video on this formula. So that being said, let's go. The big thing about this formula that's a little tricky sometimes is really truly the notation right here. So this function here that's in black, this f prime, is a different function than this function right here. So you want to be very careful. So whatever's right here, we're thinking of it as an inverse. So this function here, you'll notice there is no -1, meaning that this is the inverse function to this function, and more specifically, it's the derivative of the inverse function to whatever this function is. So anyway, let's put it together. Right, so this derivative is the derivative of the inverse function of what you see in blue, right? In our case, log base b. So if the inverse function is log base b of x, then its inverse function has to be b to the x, right? That's something we learned back in pre-calculus. So then what is this f prime right here that we see? Well, that's the derivative of the inverse function of log base b. And so that would be b to the x's derivative, which of course we already know is the natural log of the base times b to the x. And so here we go. Let's put it all together. So the derivative of log base b, again, we're going to use this formula. It's kind of a plug and chug. Again, it's a kind of a little tricky from time to time. So just remember that this f prime right here is log base b's inverse function's derivative. And a little bit of a mouthful. And so putting it together, right, we can transform that into this, right? So the natural log of b times b to the power. And of course, right, we're going to leave this whole inverse function f notation inside. So let's go ahead and replace that though. We already know that's log base b of x, and so we get to here. If you stare at that long enough, you might notice there's something rather remarkable there. And it's really this term right here. You'll notice what we have is b raised to the log base b. Well, those are two inverse functions, right? And so we have log base b inside of its inverse function, right? Which means that those two undo each other. And of course, you're just left with x. And so, well, the derivative of log base b of x is actually just 1 over the natural log of b times x. Now, if the base of this logarithm happens to be e, ergo the natural log function, well, then you get something pretty cool too, which of course is the derivative of the natural log. Definitely remember this one. The derivative of natural log is 1 over the natural log of e, which natural log of e is 1, and which of course that whole thing just reduces to 1 over x. So two very important derivatives that you definitely want to add to your arsenal. That being said, have a great day, nerds.